reading out of Joan Grants' farm memory account of the old Egypt pre-Babylonian times, entitled Winged Pharaoh. That is Joan Grant. It was published in 1937, and I have been enjoying very much reading it. She is the daughter of Pharaoh. Her father died, and she's training. She's undergoing an ordeal. She's been 5 years at the temple to learn farsight and being a proper trained seer to co-rule with her brother. So this plays apparently 5,000 years after Atlantis and pre-flood. Makes it interesting, I believe. This is chapter 15 of part 4. She is still in the tomb, far-seeing. But when last we met upon earth, he was a priest of power in the southern province of Atlanta. He remembered our old friendship, and if I would have joined him, he would have given to me a wide dominion. But I knew that his power was wielded not for the light, but against it, and I listened not to his words. I joined a band of wandering soldiers who, by the power of their swords, protected many people whom they met upon their journeyings from the oppression of the priests. Then, while my body was still young, I was killed in battle, and though my bones bleached where my body had fallen, I died in freedom. When Ishtake had tempted me to join his host, I had told him that the time would come when I too would gain power, and then I would challenge him to combat, and by my strength make him return to the light. And now the time was come when I must fulfill my challenge, and if his strength was greater than mine, then would my body die. But if I triumphed, then would he lead his host out of the shadow. We wore the likeness of our last meeting on earth. He was mighty in stature, his face proud and unyielding as a colossus of granite, his skin dusky as blue grape, and he wore a robe of purple embroidered with black and crimson symbols. I was as a young man of the red-brown people, and I wore a kilt of the warrior scarlet and a gold fillet of a captain. We fought with naked will and not with words. We stood alone upon a mountain top, alone on an island in a cloudy sea of nothingness. Behind him were ranged the thousands of his host to watch their master as he fought for them. Yet did I see them as dark thunderclouds. Behind me, down through the empty depths of space, there shone a shaft of scarlet light. I felt that in the universe I was alone, fighting against this dark, stupendous power. I drove forth my will like lightning rods, yet did his eyes stare back unflinchingly. Both past and future were lost to me, only the eternal presence of our strife. I thought my last endurance had been reached. I knew no gods, no power. I was alone, yet must my will refuse to bow to his? Again I drove forth my shafts of molten fire to meet the white-hot challenge of his eyes. The vivid purple that shone from him flickered and grew dull, and the massing clouds behind him were pierced by shafts of light. Then, in the last upsurging of my will, he swayed and fell defenseless at my feet. And I saw him as a young boy, as when we had been brothers together. It seemed he was dying and that I had killed him, although I knew that he but returned to earth. There he will learn humility, and when in its pure white flame his pride is tempered, then will he be most splendid in the light. Before he vanished from my sight, he gave a last command to his followers, to return and walk in the path that the overlords of earth had decreed for them. And the clouds rolled back, and I saw before me a vast plain, and across it there passed the great army of Ishtake, marching into exile. So that was chapter 15, and I'll continue with chapter 16. Is it quite long? No, it's not very long. Then did I undergo the 7 great ordeals. No longer could I look across the sea of time, wise in the garnerings of my long journey. For in this testing of my will, I was bound to the present, encompassed by the limitation of earth and enshrouded in its fears. Before me I saw a vast swamp of quaking mud, which clogged the eyes and nostrils and the open mouths of the long dead that it had drowned. From its dark surface there stretched the arms of skeletons, their clutching fingers transfixed in their despair, and fetid bubbles broke its dark expanse, the dying breath of those it had engulfed. Upon it there were tufts of withered reeds, and as I stepped upon them they sank under me, sucked beneath the ooze. Yet did I will my footsteps to the light, and before each tuft sank down I reached the next. The swamp seemed to stretch before me out of sight, and for an endless time I laboured there. And then I felt firm ground beneath my feet, and I knew that I had triumphed in the first ordeal. Then before me in the mountain side I saw a cave, and from its passage led steeply down into a darkness, piercing with bats that swept about me with their leathern wings, lit by a faint phosphorescence, which came from bodies whose putrefying flesh fouled the sand air with heavy, sickening stench. The shaft slanted more deeply down. It narrowed until I had to crawl, and further, until I lay upon my face and could only drag my body through the cleft by digging my fingers into the rock. I went forward in a darkness closer than a tomb, and I had thought that I should be entrapped, to linger eternally in the crushing shroud of a mighty mountain, cleaving to the earth. Here time stood still, yet seemed eternity. I found my way, barred by solid rock, but with my will I drove my desperate hands to claw their way against it. Not until my fingers were stumps of splintered bone did it yield before me. Then I fought myself into the freedom of the outer air, and I had triumphed in the second ordeal. Then before me I saw a plain of fire, and the air was dark with smoke of burning flesh. Through the blazing pillars of hungry flames I saw charred bodies, still twisting in their pain, and as I thought of the pain that they endured, it seemed that my skin would crack beneath the heat and show my bones black in my blistered flesh. Yet I went into this tumult of devouring flames, and they parted before me, and they died low, as when a grass fire reaches the river. I walked forward upon a pathway of glowing ashes, yet their scarlet marked not my feet with blood. At last I felt a cool wind blowing upon me, and there was no longer the voice of fire about my ears, and I had triumphed in the third ordeal. Then I stood upon the bank of a wide river, and I knew that I must cross it, but as I looked upon it, I saw that the water churned with crocodiles. I nearly fled in terror from this place, but I remembered how once I had seen a crocodile snatch a man and crunch him like a twig between its jaws. They floated like logs along the river bank and watched me with their heavy-lidded eyes, and then the water was still for the ripples as they swam towards me like fish hungry for millet in a pool. Then did I keep them frozen with my will until they floated like a chain of rafts, and I crossed the river on their rigid backs, but only the ones before my eyes were stilled, and those behind me flailed their scaly tails in anger and lashed the water in their fierce pursuit. And as I felt the horror of their breath, I reached the safety of the other bank and knew I had triumphed in the fourth ordeal. Then before me I saw a narrow road avenued by archers. Between them lay the people they had slain, quivered with arrows, and others who crawled onwards in their agony, making their path scarlet with blood. As I walked between this singing death, I knew that if a single arrow pierced my side, I would have failed, and my earth body die. My only armour was to show no fear, and I walked forward with unhurried steps, the wind of arrows hot against my cheek, buzzing like angry bees about me. Slowly I walked along this path of death, until at last I found that the air was quiet, and I stood alone upon a grassy plain, and I had triumphed in the 5th ordeal. Then before me I saw a mighty cliff, soaring above me, stark against the clouds, grey as the caverns where the light shines not. And at its foot lay mutilated shapes of broken bodies, fallen from the heights, their pulped flesh riven by the splintered bones. I knew that I must scale this precipice, which stretched above me like a polished wall. Yet, as I looked, I saw that there were cracks in its smooth surface at which I could cling with my desperate fingers. My body seemed heavier than stone as ever upwards I forced myself to climb. Sometimes the rock gave way beneath my hand, and I was left hanging by a finger joint, my muscles stretched into shrill chords of pain. Yet slowly, ever upwards, I crept on, until the skin hung tattered on my arms, and fleshless fingers held my draining strength. And when I felt that the draw of the abyss beneath me must enslave my will, with a last desperate effort, I reached the summit of this barrier and flung myself full stretched upon the ground, rejoicing in this blessed anchorage. Then I saw that my body was unscarred, and I had triumphed in the 6th ordeal. Then before me was the last ordeal, which to me was greater than all the others I had passed, for it encompassed the essence of all my fears. I saw before me a great pit, and islanded in a rushing sea of snakes. A mighty cobra reared upon its coils. Vipers writhed and slithered along the floor, weaving an endless pattern of venomed death. Yet must I walk across their changing coils and crush the cobra between my hands. Its eyes glittered scarlet, and its mighty boar hood shone with the brilliance of its armored scales. It seemed that for an endless span of time I stood with horror naked in my eyes. Then I walked down into this hissing pit, and the vipers drew back before me in vicious waves, and I seized the cobra below its swaying head and held it from me as I tried to strike. 10,000 times, again 10,000 times, I thought that I had reached the final refuge of my desperate will. It seemed that time was endless and earth grown cold, until, under the last onslaught of my will, the mighty serpent slid down upon its coils, and I was with its dead body in an empty pit. Ta-da! Brilliant. Sakita did the 7 ordeals satisfactory. Have a lovely Tuesday. It's very bright, I know, but it's listening, not watching, so... Where are we here? It's so bright.